In the spring of 1962, a United States Navy vessel dropped anchor above a remote stretch of the Central Pacific Ocean and began lowering instruments into water so deep that sunlight had never touched the bottom. The crew recorded coordinates, depths, and magnetic readings that were then sealed, classified, and sent to a government facility in Virginia, where they remained untouched for decades. When researchers finally filed a Freedom of Information request for those documents, the Navy responded with a single sentence: the records could not be located. But three former officers who served on that mission told a different story, and what they described changed everything we thought we knew about this part of the world. Information from internet sources, links in description. Subscribe, let's begin. The Pacific Ocean covers more surface area than every continent on Earth combined, and yet for most of human history, we treated it as empty space, a vast blue nothing between places that actually mattered. That assumption began to crack in the early 20th century, when deep-sea survey ships started returning with sonar data that made no sense according to the geology textbooks of the time. Ridge systems appeared where no ridges should exist. Thermal vents pushed heat upward through crust that was supposedly cold and stable. And in several locations, the ocean floor appeared to have been shaped by forces that geologists could not yet name. By 1960, the United States military had developed a very specific interest in a triangular zone, roughly bounded by the Marshall Islands, the Line Islands, and an unmarked region northeast of Kiribati. This zone sat directly beneath several proposed nuclear test corridors, and the Navy needed precise bathymetric charts, detailed maps of underwater terrain, before any further testing could be approved. That is the official reason the 1962 survey mission was launched. And for many years it seemed like a perfectly boring explanation for a perfectly routine operation. But the survey was not routine, and the three officers who later spoke to independent researchers did not describe a mission focused on nuclear testing at all. What they described was a response, a reaction to something that had already been detected, something that had shown up on hydrophone arrays across the Pacific and caused genuine alarm inside the Office of Naval Intelligence. The SOSUS network, the Sound Surveillance System, was a series of underwater microphones placed along the ocean floor during the Cold War to detect Soviet submarines moving through the Atlantic and Pacific basins. By 1961, the SOSUS operators at their listening stations had become so familiar with submarine signatures that they could identify specific vessels by the acoustic pattern of their propellers, a kind of underwater fingerprint. That familiarity is exactly what made the signal detected in late 1961 so disturbing, because it matched nothing in any catalog, Soviet, American, British, or otherwise. Think about what that means for a moment. The most sensitive listening network ever built by human hands, staffed by analysts who had spent years learning the sounds of the deep ocean, encountered something it could not identify, something moving through water at a depth that no known vessel could survive. The signal lasted 11 days, appeared in 3 separate SOSUS stations spaced thousands of miles apart, and then stopped as cleanly as if someone had switched off a light. Internal Navy documents from early 1962, some of which have since been partially declassified, refer to the event only by a project code, Trident Shelf. No explanation accompanies the code name, no technical summary, no conclusion. Just the label, stamped in the margin of budget requests that authorized the survey mission we are discussing tonight. The ship assigned to lead the 1962 survey was the USNS Mizar, a vessel with a distinguished and genuinely strange history that deserves its own explanation before we go any further. The Mizar was originally built as a cargo and supply ship, but by the early 1960s, it had been converted into a deep ocean research platform, equipped with some of the most advanced sensing gear of its era. It would later become famous for locating the wreck of the USS Thresher, a nuclear submarine that sank in 1963, and for recovering a hydrogen bomb lost off the coast of Spain in 1966. The Mizar was not sent to routine assignments. It was sent when the Navy needed answers to questions it did not want to ask out loud. In the spring of 1962, it departed Pearl Harbor with a crew of 47 and a team of civilian scientists whose names do not appear in any public record of the mission. That last detail, the unnamed civilians, is where the story starts to press against something uncomfortable, something that the official record simply refuses to address. Standard Navy survey operations include full crew manifests, civilian contractor documentation, and daily operational logs that are archived within 18 months of a mission's completion. For the 1962 Pacific Survey, the crew manifest exists and is publicly accessible, but the civilian team attached to the scientific division appears nowhere, not in the manifest, not in the contractor records, not in the budget documentation that authorized their presence. One of the three former officers who gave testimony to researcher David Paulides in the early 2000s under the condition of anonymity described the civilian team as belonging to a group he called simply the Washington office. He said they kept their equipment in a locked compartment below the main lab deck, and that standard crew members were explicitly prohibited from entering that space under any circumstances. He also said that when the Mizar reached the designated survey zone, the civilians took over the primary sonar array for a period of 9 days, while the regular crew conducted surface-level magnetic readings. 9 days of deep sonar operations in a specific zone, conducted by an unnamed team from an unnamed office, producing data that was then physically removed from the ship before it returned to port. Let that sit with you for a second, because what follows is where the account becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. When the Mizar entered the target zone, a region centered on coordinates that the officer recalled as approximately 7 degrees north latitude, 168 degrees west longitude. The ship's standard depth sounders returned readings that contradicted existing charts by an enormous margin. The charts, drawn from previous surveys conducted in the 1940s, showed water depths in that area of approximately 3,000 meters, deep but not exceptional for the Central Pacific. The 1962 readings showed something dramatically different, a feature on the ocean floor that the officer described as a shelf-like formation extending laterally for what the instruments suggested was close to 80 kilometers. Below that shelf, the sonar suggested depths not of 3,000 meters, but of something close to 6,000, a drop so sudden and so geometrically regular that the civilian team reportedly suspended normal operations for an entire day to recalibrate their instruments. They were not malfunctioning. The shelf was real, it was large, and according to the officer's account, its edges were, and this is the word he used specifically, symmetrical, in a way that natural geological formations are not. Now, before you decide where you stand on that claim, consider the geological context, because it actually makes the story harder to dismiss, not easier. The Central Pacific sits above what geologists call the Pacific Large Low Shear Velocity Province, a massive anomaly deep in Earth's mantle, where seismic waves travel more slowly than they should, suggesting unusual thermal or chemical conditions far below the crust. This structure is one of two such anomalies on Earth the other lying beneath Africa, and neither is fully understood despite decades of study. What sits above this mantle feature on the ocean floor is a region of the Pacific that has produced some of the most geologically unusual formations ever recorded. Seamounts of unexpected age, volcanic chains that run against the predicted direction of plate motion, and magnetic striping patterns that don't match the models built to explain them. In other words, this is not empty water above boring rock. This is one of the most geologically active and poorly understood regions of the deep ocean on the planet. And in 1962, the United States Navy sent its best deep survey vessel directly into the center of it. What they brought back, or more precisely, what was taken off the ship before it could be formally logged, remains one of the more persistent and genuinely documented gaps in the public scientific record of the 20th century. The second officer who spoke on record, a sonar technician who served aboard the Mizar on a later but related mission in 1963, described being shown a set of bathymetric maps during a classified briefing that he said were labeled as products of the 1962 survey. Those maps, he stated, showed not one, but three distinct shelf formations in the target zone, arranged in a pattern that the briefing officer described, and the technician remembered this phrase precisely, as inconsistent with random geological processes. Inconsistent with random geological processes. That phrase, spoken in a classified briefing room sometime in 1963, is either the careful language of a scientist describing an unusual natural feature, or it is something else entirely. And the refusal of the Navy to release the underlying data means we cannot currently tell the difference. The third officer's account focuses not on what the sonar found on the ocean floor, but on what happened after the mission returned to Pearl Harbor, specifically on a meeting that took place between the Mizar's commanding officer and two men in civilian clothes who arrived by unmarked aircraft from the mainland. The meeting lasted 3 hours, took place in a secured room at the Pearl Harbor Naval Station, and when it ended, the commanding officer reportedly told his senior staff that all personal notes related to the survey zone were to be surrendered immediately. Not copied, not summarized, surrendered, physically handed over to the two men in civilian clothes, who then departed on the same unmarked aircraft they had arrived on. The commanding officer, whose name appears in the Mizar's official crew manifest, died in 1987 and left no published memoir, no oral history recording, and no correspondence that has ever entered the public domain. His service record shows a promotion within 4 months of the 1962 mission's completion, an unusually fast advancement for a vessel commander of his rank, and one that no available document explains. Now, you might be constructing a reasonable explanation in your head right now. Classified military research, Cold War secrecy, standard procedure for sensitive operations. And you would not be wrong to try. The Cold War produced genuine mountains of classification, and a great deal of what looks mysterious from the outside turns out to be mundane when the files eventually open. But here is what makes the 1962 Pacific Survey different from standard Cold War secrecy, and why researchers have continued pressing on it for more than 60 years. Standard classified missions produce records, internal records, budget trails, personnel files, contractor invoices that remain classified but provably exist within the government archive system. When you file a Freedom of Information request for a classified Cold War document, the typical response is either a redacted release or a formal denial that acknowledges the document exists but cannot be shared. The response to requests about the 1962 Pacific Survey has been categorically different. The Navy's official position is not that the records are classified, but that they cannot be located, which is a bureaucratic statement with a very specific and uncomfortable meaning. Cannot be located means either the records were destroyed, which requires its own documentation trail under federal law, or they were moved outside the standard archive system into a storage category that the Freedom of Information Act does not reach. That second possibility has a name inside the research community that studies government transparency. It is called a Special Access Program Repository, and it is a real and legally recognized category of government storage that sits entirely outside the normal declassification pipeline. Records placed in Special Access Program storage do not appear in archive indices, do not generate search results, and cannot be acknowledged or denied under standard FOIA procedure. They simply do not exist as far as the public record is concerned. The 1962 Pacific Survey data may be sitting in exactly such a repository right now, in a facility that holds hundreds of other files the public has never heard of, waiting for a declassification review that may never come. But the geological question, the physical question of what is actually on the ocean floor in that part of the Pacific, does not depend on government files to answer. And that is where the story takes an unexpected turn. In 2017, a team of oceanographers from the Schmidt Ocean Institute, conducting an unrelated deep-sea survey of the Central Pacific, published preliminary sonar data that included a region overlapping with the approximate coordinates described by the first MISAR officer. Their data, which is publicly available through the Schmidt Institute's open access database, shows a series of abrupt bathymetric changes in that zone, not gentle slopes, but steep, structured transitions between depth levels that the team noted in their published summary as requiring further investigation. They did not describe the formations as symmetrical. They did not connect their findings to any prior military survey, and their language was appropriately cautious. But the formations are there, visible in the data, exactly where the 1962 accounts said they would be. That is not proof of anything extraordinary. Geological formations can be steep and structured without any unusual explanation. But it is independent confirmation that the ocean floor in that specific region behaves differently from the surrounding terrain, and that the 1962 survey team was not describing something imaginary. What they were describing, and what the unnamed civilians with their locked equipment were apparently measuring for 9 days, remains the central, unanswered question of this entire story. There is one more thread to pull here, and it connects the 1962 survey not to geology, but to a pattern of military activity in the Central Pacific that stretches across nearly 2 decades and has never been coherently explained. Between 1962 and 1978, the United States Navy conducted at least 7 additional deep survey operations in the same general region of the Pacific, each one authorized under different project codes, each one producing records that are either classified, missing, or available only in forms so heavily redacted that the operational details are completely invisible. 7 missions over 16 years to the same stretch of open ocean. That is not routine maintenance of existing charts. That is sustained, focused attention on a specific place. The kind of attention you pay when you believe something is there, and you have not yet figured out what it is. The pattern was first identified by investigative journalist John Greenwald, who runs the Black Vault Archive, one of the most comprehensive collections of declassified and FOIA-requested government documents in the United States. Greenwald noted in a 2019 presentation that the budget line items connecting these 7 missions shared a common reference number that does not correspond to any named program in the public Navy record. A ghost number, essentially, attached to real money and real operations, but pointing to nothing that officially exists. Consider for a moment what kind of institutional commitment that represents. 7 missions, 16 years, a shared budget code, an unnamed Washington office, civilian scientists whose names were never recorded. This is not the footprint of a project that was considered low priority or unimportant. This is the footprint of a project that someone, at a very high level of the American national security apparatus, considered worth protecting indefinitely. The question of why connects back to something the second officer said during his testimony about the 1963 briefing. The moment when he was shown the maps labeled as products of the 1962 survey and heard the phrase, inconsistent with random geological processes. He said that after the briefing ended, one of the presenting scientists, a civilian, older, who had been introduced only by a first name, paused at the door and said to the room, not to anyone specifically, that the formations in the survey zone were old. Not old in the geological sense of millions of years, which would be unremarkable for ocean floor structures. Old in the sense that the chemical signatures in the sediment cores taken from the shelf formations suggested the structures had been exposed to open water, not buried under sediment, at a time when the sea level in that part of the Pacific would have been dramatically lower than it is today. Dramatically lower sea levels in the Central Pacific occurred during the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, when vast quantities of water were locked in continental ice sheets and ocean levels globally ran between 100 and 130 meters below current shorelines. What that scientist was suggesting, carefully at a door to a room of cleared military personnel, was that the shelf formations on the ocean floor had been shaped, or at least exposed, during a period when that part of the ocean was not ocean at all. Whether that shaping was purely geological or involved something else entirely is the question that the officer said no one in the room asked out loud, because the answer was implied clearly enough that asking it felt unnecessary. The files that would settle this question remain wherever they were placed in the months after the Mizar returned to Pearl Harbor in 1962, and the 2 men who flew in on an unmarked aircraft to collect the crew's personal notes have been dead for decades. What remains is the Schmidt Institute data, showing unusual formations at the right coordinates. The budget trail, connecting 7 follow-up missions across 16 years. The testimony of 3 officers whose accounts align in their central details without being identical, which is actually the mark of honest recollection rather than coordinated fabrication. And a Navy archive response that refuses to confirm the records even exist. The Pacific does not give up its secrets easily, and the people who have spent the most time studying its floor, the oceanographers, the Navy technicians, the survey crews who lowered instruments into water that no light has ever touched, tend to describe it the same way, as a place that is far stranger and far less understood than anything we say about it in public. Whatever the Mizar found in the spring of 1962, it was considered important enough to protect for more than 60 years, and there is no current indication that the protection is ending. The ocean is still there, the formations are still there, and somewhere in a building that does not appear on any public map, the records are almost certainly still there too. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.